right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the podcast here, the DotPro. I am BreakyCPK. Really excited to be here once again. What is now our second episode here, and a lot more Kiev Major to talk about here. Boy, oh boy, is this an exciting time for Dota 2 right now. I'm sure you guys at home are enjoying this. If you're tuning into this podcast, I assume that you've been watching at least a little bit of the Kiev Major, or perhaps you're tuning in because you weren't and you want to hear what happened. Well, that's what we're here to provide. That's what I'm here to provide, and also some guests that I'm going to be joined by later on in the show, including the one, the only Peter Pan Dam from EG. We got Nahaz, the statsman himself, going to be joining us. And we even got the opportunity to sit down with Conrad and talk a little bit about the event. Conrad, of course, he's on the panelist there. He's on the panel, I should say, at the Kiev Major. And we got to kind of take from him what it's like being there and how the event's going. So I'm really excited for this show, guys. Hopefully you are as well. And again, looking forward to talking plenty of the Kiev Major. So with that said, pretty much getting right into it here. In case you haven't heard just yet, or perhaps we're waiting for the show. First off, I do think that's freaking awesome. But let's go over the results first. Let's just kind of start right there. Just a very quick. This is how the Kiev Major so far has played out. So there was a 2-day group stage event that happened here on the 24th and the 25th. Basically, the 16 teams, they played in what was the Swiss format. Of course, if you tuned into last week's show, you got our takes. Myself, I had a Capitalist and Red Eye even on. We got to talk about the Swiss format, and there's been a lot of discussion happening. Well, now we got to finally see it in action, and honestly, I think it worked pretty well. And as I stated before going into it, I was definitely a fan of the idea of the format. I think it was going to be a pretty good way to find out which team we're going to see in the following stages, and I think it did a good job of doing that. I do think you could make the argument maybe one more round would have been necessary. Maybe one more round would have really fine-tuned it that much more, but I feel like you're always going to possibly be saying that, right? Like in a perfect world, we would have had each team play the other, and then that's how it would have all gotten the seeding. But again, with the scheduling, that wasn't going to happen. Even with it happening like it did, the scheduling, there were still 13, 14-hour days, which is pretty ridiculous, especially for the talent and the production. So definitely plan to give a little bit of my take on that later on as well. But okay, so back to the results, though. Simply put, we had Team Secret looking like the strong team of the event so far. They finished as the overall top seed. They were 6-0 in individual games, 3-0 overall. They faced off against VGJ to kick it off, one of the first matches to happen, in fact, and I think it was actually on the mainstream, if I'm not mistaken, to kick it off. They actually, yeah, that's right, because they fell behind early on in that game, and I remember thinking to myself, I picked a couple of things. I picked Team Secret to be one of my semifinalists, very possibly one of the semifinalists in the main event. And then on top of that, I have KZU on the team. This is just a fun team that I personally enjoy watching, and I got to watch them at the European qualifiers quite a bit, cast them a couple of times. They looked good, so I was expecting good things out of them. But when they started falling behind VGJ early on, I was like, oh crap, not looking good. Not only did they come back, but they ended up winning that series 2-0 against VGJ right there. And then they went on quite the hot streak. They faced DC. They took them out 2-0 later on in the day. And that matched them up against Invictus Gaming, actually, going into day number 2, where the winner of that would actually be one of the 2 top seeds. And, well, similar to the VGJ matchup, they actually fell behind early on in that game. I'm trying to look at the lineups there. That's right. So, yeah, Secret, they actually picked a very physical lineup. They ran a Lycan, which actually they ran a couple of times. So with that said, we saw a lot of interesting hero picks. Again, that's something else we'll talk about a little bit. But they ran Lycan in that matchup. They ran a TA. They had Ricky support, which is another hero we saw plenty of, and Abaddon and a Rasta on top of that, aka Shadow Shaman. A lot of physical damage. And on the other side, IG went somewhat magic heavy, but they also had a Sven as their carry, bringing in that Warcry buff, the plus 20 armor for himself and the team. They had LC with the press the attack. They had a Pudge, actually, with a Lena, as well as a Vengeful Spirit. So those are the lineups on either side. And IG actually got off to a pretty strong start, and it was looking like Secret was going to find themselves in a hole. But mid-1, oh my god, mid-1. If you want to look at an MVP of the group stages, Mid 1 was phenomenal. There's a reason why this dude has 9.4k MMR, whatever it is. And apparently he randoms all the time, which that is also another crazy thing. In case you weren't aware of that, I wasn't aware of that until I found out, hearing about that on the panelist there as they were talking about it. But he took over as TA in that game specifically, and I feel like that especially has really set the tone for Secret. Multiple games he did that. He did that Shadow Fiend, I think it was the first game, in fact, going back to the VGJ matchup. He was on Shadow Fiend in that game, and he actually had to come back strong for his team to ultimately win that series as well, that game, and let alone the series. So not to make a point, it's the mid 1 show 100%. They're playing very well around him as a team, but mid 1 has definitely proven to be a star in the making, if he wasn't one to an extent already. So, long story short, they ended up winning that series, of course, 2-0, which means they went undefeated, as mentioned before. Now, it was going to come down to them or Virtus Pro as the absolute top seed. Virtus Pro, however, they did end up losing one game to Team Random, actually, on the first day, which meant they finished 6-1 overall with that 3-0 record. So that gave them the second seed, going as the one of the two top teams. So Secret gets the top seed, Virtus Pro the second seed as a result of that. Now, again, that ended up being very important. I say that because the bottom two teams, one of them ended up being the expected, SG Esports. Now, while I mentioned that team right there, let's go ahead and quickly and mention what they did at this event. Yes, they finished last place, but you know what? I think in a sense they mission accomplished, because they took the very first game of the tournament off of OG. Yes, the OG, the defending 3-time champions of the majors, the defending champion of the Boston Major, of course, the OG. SG Esports won the first game. Now, let's not look at the fact that OG was running an Arc Warden, a Faceless Void, a Rasta. They were doing some funky stuff, to be fair. But SG Esports won the first game. So, all of a sudden, SG's up 1-0. It's like, wait, what's going on here? OG took care of business in the rest of the series. Ended up winning the next two games pretty decisively. So, and then SG Esports, unfortunately, went on to lose their next two series. They matched up against Liquid in the following round, and then where they lost 0-2. And then they got matched up against Faceless, where they lost 0-2, which put them at that 1-6 record, 0-3. So they ended up finishing 16th. So our first round matchup, actually, speaking of, we'll preview that a little bit too, but Secret versus SG Esports is the matchup there. But I mentioned that was very important to get for the overall first seed, because the second seed in Virtus Pro, they're finding themselves playing against IG Vitality. IG Vitality is not a team I would have expected to be at the bottom of the list right there, but IG Vitality, they found themselves in trouble. They went 0-3. They actually had to face some Chinese opponents their first two matchups. They lost to Team Random and then to VGJ, and then they actually went 0-2 against Mouse Sports. See, Mouse Sports I would have expected to possibly be that 15th seed, if anything. But no, it was indeed IG Vitality. So IG Vitality is, that's not a team that's just going to give in by any means, especially in the single elimination format. So I got to think Virtus Pro a little almost upset in some cases about that. But at the same time, Virtus Pro did look freaking good themselves for the most part. And again, going up against a team that's clearly struggling for the group stages in IG Vitality, they should be able to win that one. But it is a scary opponent. Nonetheless, for Virtus Pro. By the way, Virtus Pro, one of their game losses, I think I mentioned that earlier, just in case though, it was to Team Random, as I said there. So Team Random, okay, so first off, I want to kind of keep on track here with what I want to go over. So again, the overall results, those are some of the bigger ones. In the quick rundown here, in third place was Invictus Gaming. You had then TNC Pro Team, followed by OG, Team Liquid, Digital Chaos, Thunderbirds, Evil Geniuses, VGJ, Newbie, Random, Faceless, Mouse Sports, IG Vitality, and SG Esports. So that kind of rounds out the 16 right there, as I was mentioning. Again, he had Secret and Virtus Pro, the 1 and 2 teams. So that's how it ultimately played out. Obviously, there's all this information on the internet, and I personally use Liquipedia quite a bit, but all over the place. So if you need to get a visual, you can find it anywhere. Those resources there, but. Hopefully I did a good job of at least trying to break it down a little bit in terms of how they shaped up right there. But again, those are the impactful ones. Now, as you may have heard throughout that, a couple of things making note of from those results right there. So let's start with the disappointing results. We'll start with that first. as far as disappointing results went, so if you happen to listen to my first show, you'll know that I mentioned that I was expecting the Chinese region to actually do very well this event. In the Boston Major, they did not. 6 Chinese teams went to the Boston Major through qualifiers and invites. Only one of them made the quarterfinals, and that was because they played another Chinese team in the round of 16. And that was LFY, I believe. And then they got knocked out in the round of 8. To say the least, they had a very disappointing Boston Major event. Post-Boston Major, they've had some decent results, most noticeably, of course, IG winning the DAC recently, but even teams like Newbie have had some victories, some pretty solid victories. And some of these other Chinese teams, of course, IG Vitality even has looked good at times. So VGJ, of course, their hot streak is a reason why they were invited, and I was stressing for that when the invites were coming out. So I just did not see the Chinese region once again flopping here at this event. Now, I know that this is quote-unquote only the group stages, as some people like to say, but it's interesting to me. I don't get it. I don't get how the Chinese region is struggling so much when they are playing so much. They are playing by far. I stressed that last week. Nahaz did a great job posting a stat about going into the Kiev Major. Between the Boston Major and the Kiev Major, the top 5 teams, both in the West and the East, East being China, of course, West being NA, EU, CIS, whatever, playing against each other, China faced off against one another 84 times, I believe it was. Everyone else, the NA, EU, CIS regions, those top 5 teams, they played each other 20 times, 22 times, I think it was. Basically 25% of what the Chinese teams did. And again, one of the bigger reasons you have events like the DPL, as we've talked about, the DPL Top League. It's kind of this regular season format where all the teams play each other in a weekly format, and then they go into a playoff event, and it's kind of this really organized style of event, similar to like an LCS or whatever, just more so online for the most part. The point is, they're playing a lot and against one another. So you'd figure with all that extra quote-unquote practice and, really figuring out each other's strategies and what they want to be doing, that would mean something. But if, in case you didn't fully hear as far as I was reading off the results right there, in the top 8, only one team was in the top 8 from China. There's 5 teams at this event that are from China. Only one of the top 8 teams were from China. That, of course, being Invictus Gaming. Now, again, that's no surprise to anyone. They're the ones that lived up to expectations in a lot of ways. Now, they didn't get the top seed, but they finished 3-1. Their loss was actually to Team Secret, as mentioned. Again, Team Secret looking very good, though. And then they went on to beat EG, though, 2-1 in their final series to claim that 3rd spot right there. So they also had to 2-0 against OG, by the way, in their second round matchup. So again, Invictus Gaming is living up to expectations, and I think they're continuing this hot streak now going into the playoffs. The other teams, though, surprisingly enough to me, in fact, Random arguably looked the best out of the other 4 Chinese teams, which is just mind-blowing to me, honestly, with not only the drama that they've been through lately, but frankly, results have just been not good / irrelevant for what was Wings Gaming, now known as Team Random. So the fact that now, overall results, they actually finished in the 12th place spot. They finished behind VGJ and Newbie, and then as I mentioned earlier, IG Vitality finished 15th overall. But Random, they actually went 2-1 against IG Vitality. Then they went to a Game 3 against Virtus Pro. They went to a Game 3 against OG. And then they ended up losing 2-0 to Newbie in their final match. But still, they contested against the best teams in this event. And so despite even finishing in that 12th place spot, they actually looked the best of those other 4 Chinese teams, which frankly still wasn't good, as we saw, finishing 1-3. VGJ and Newbie, yes, they finished with 2-2 records, but you look at who they beat. VGJ beat IG Vitality and then Mouse Sports. Newbie beat Mouse Sports and Team Random. So the overall competition that they ended up defeating wasn't the greatest. So it goes back to my original point that as far as a disappointing team goes, or disappointment in general with the Kiev Major qualifiers, the Chinese region, frankly, is just, they looked flat in a lot of ways going into these group stages. Will that be the case going to the main event? Part of me still wants to believe that's going to change, and we're going to actually see the results, as I somewhat predicted, of arguably having 2, if not 3 teams in the semifinals. But after watching those group stages, let's just say my brackets that I filled out, I definitely do not have anyone outside of IG moving on to the semifinals, let alone even getting out of the round of 16. And I think that's for good reason with the results that they had. So yeah, that's going to be one of the more interesting things for me to definitely look out for when it comes to watching the playoffs here coming up. But again, keeping on the group stages though, another thing that really stood out to me now as far as the positive goes was actually there was a couple of things here. Some positive things at DC actually. Digital Chaos. Now we're talking about the new Digital Chaos, of course. Not what's known as Thunderbirds now, but Digital Chaos, formerly Team Onyx, of course, a team that qualified out of NA. We're looking at Abed, Demon, Dubu, Mason, and I'm putting myself on the spot right here. For some reason, blanking on their fifth player. Let me look at it real quickly. That would be Bulba, of course. How could I forget Loba, a.k.a. Bulba? No, but of course, so that's a 5-man roster right there. Abed especially, not that this is a surprise, but he looked really good for the team. Kind of similar to what Mid 1 was for Secret. Abed definitely was for DC. And I feel like Abed is for the longest time. Now, granted, this guy's still young. I believe he's only 18 years old. He's still an up-and-coming prodigy even in the Dota 2 world. Competitive scene. He's known as the Meepo player, right? That's where his big name definitely comes from, and boy, is it for good reason. The dude is damn impressive on Meepo. That's the reason they're in this Kiev Major in the first place. RIP Complexity. But this guy can play other heroes, and he showed that once again in this event, playing other heroes such as Shadow Fiend, Invoker, very good on such hero, and including, I don't know if he played TA, actually. I shouldn't say that without 100% knowing. But the point is, he looked very good across the board for the team. Now, Digital Chaos, they finished in the 7th place spot, but frankly, I think that's a lot better than people would have given credit for. I expected them to be a bottom 4 team. And now, in hindsight, kind of looking at the team and really looking at the roster and being like, why did I rate them so low? And I think a lot of people are kind of doing that after these group stages especially. Because, again, you have history there. You have Dubu, who obviously is the MVP Phoenix history. You have Demon, who has definitely been around forever. You have Mason, who has his history and, his success in the scene. You have Bulba, of course, and a very good player with his history. Like, all these players have very good experience outside of Abed, sure enough. But Abed is just one of these new and upcoming players that, again, is a prodigy of sorts. So why shouldn't DC be a team that does well at this event? Well, they kind of showed that. Their results were pretty good overall, finishing 7th place, 2-2 record. They defeated Newbie right off the bat 2-0, a very strong start there. Now, we found out Newbie maybe not as strong as expected going into this event, but still, they lost 0-2 to Secret. Again, nothing to be too worried about there. Then they went 2-1 against Liquid, actually, and then they went 1-2 against TNC. So you see those results right there. They beat a team that ended up finishing 6th place and Liquid right above them. And they lost in a 3-game series to TNC, who ended up finishing 4th place, who's another team, by the way, that also looked very, very good from the group stages. So that's kind of a nice transition there, actually, as far as another team that happened to look really good. And by the way, DC took the first game off of TNC going into the final set of matches right there before losing it 2-1. That ended up having a pretty epic game, I believe. No, that was another series, but yeah, there were several series that had 70-plus minute games, by the way, which is pretty crazy in itself. But yeah, TNC, though, was another team that was very impressive, finishing 4th place overall. Their only loss was actually to Virtus Pro, losing that series 2-0, which obviously finished 2nd place. They defeated EG, Thunderbirds, and Digital Chaos in their games, 2-0, 2-1, and 2-1, including that start against EG where they won it 2-0, as mentioned. So TNC, they're kind of showing that this is a team that is not a fluke by any means, coming out of Southeast Asia. Ever since they did so well at the WESG, but there's a lot of people suggesting, well, it's a tier 2 tournament, whatever. And they're right. I mean, WESG definitely is not a tournament you look at it and suggest that, oh, this is a great team because they won that event. But then they had their success at, what was it? I want to say it was was it the Star Ladder that they ended up getting runner-up at or doing very well at? I'm blanking now on the specific result. I'm seeing if I can find it real quickly. Yeah, they finished 3rd, 4th place at the Star Ladder. They got to the 3rd, 4th place match. They lost to Liquid there in that case. But again, they really kind of showed at that event. It's like, okay, well, actually, maybe it wasn't a crazy fluke, or that this is a team that maybe we should be paying attention to moving forward. But now here they are, in that 4th seed going into the playoff stage. I think they've really caught a lot of people's attention, and including there was one player, Raven, actually played Spectre for one of their games. I guess he broke the old-time Valve major record in terms of kills by a hero with 33 kills. He had 33 kills on Spectre. They also played a couple of really long games, if I remember correctly. I'm kind of going through now here on Wikipedia real quick. But yeah, that was, they were actually on the verge of being one of the top seeds. They went to a 75-minute game against Virtus Pro in game number 1. And then they ended up losing that series, though, 2-0 after losing that first game. And you could tell that they were drained. I mean, these were long days, and especially after a long game like that, they were drained and obviously lost it in the end, 2-0 to Virtus Pro right there. So, but a very good team and one that has a lot of momentum going into the playoff stage. Outside of that, I wouldn't say there was any huge disappointments or huge surprises necessarily. When it comes to the team results, at least. Another surprise for me, though, out of the group stages, focusing a little bit differently, more so on heroes, was actually we saw several games. God knows why. We saw several games where Arc Warden was played. Actually, now I believe it might have only been played by 2 different teams. I know for a fact, as I mentioned earlier, OG actually ran Arc Warden in at least a couple of the games. They ran it in their first game included. In fact, here, I have it right here. He was actually picked a total of 6 times, which to me, again, is just insane. But he was picked 6 times. He went 1-5 in his games that he was played. He was actually also played by Team Liquid, sure enough. So it was actually OG, Liquid. OG ran him twice. So OG ran him 3 times, really. Why did OG run him 3 times? OG actually beat Thunderbirds with him, to be fair, so interesting there. But Faceless also tried him a couple of times. Actually, oh no, what am I saying? Faceless was the only one to win with him. Okay, I'm looking at this wrong. So Faceless actually beat SG Esports with an Arc Warden. Outside of that, Arc Warden did not have a win in the 6 games that we saw him. So, yeah, I get why on paper, and even in those games, even in the losing efforts, he was interesting. Now, with how popular Hand of Midas was, which that's something else we'll also get into later on in the show. But it's a hero that very much likes Hand of Midas because of the fact you have his replicate who uses it to its full potential. So that is maybe a reason why, perhaps the ultimate reason why he was being seen. But he is a very annoying hero to deal with in a long drawn out game. I get that, but when it comes to actually getting you a victory, he wasn't doing that. And this, as Nahaz would say, stats do not lie. So that's a hero that it was one of those kind of fun trial heroes, but I do not expect to see him going on to the playoff stage, to say the least. But it was interesting to see him, though, again, 6 times, a hero that we just was completely, has been irrelevant for the longest time now. Another standout hero, by the way, though, and a little bit more positive now, was Nature's Prophet. Now, going into this event, Nature's Prophet, we saw trickles of Nature's Prophet because his talent trees got buffed up in recent patches. And personally, I casting tournaments here and there. Now we're talking about a lot of cases like tier 2 tournaments, so not take too much from it, but I didn't see a lot of positive out of Nature's Prophet. It seemed like he was weak. It seemed like he really wasn't doing enough. It seemed like he's very good at being solo and doing his own thing, but when it comes to winning the game as a team, he's not the best pickup. In this event, however, he was actually picked up 10 different times, and he had a 50% win percentage, which frankly isn't too bad. He was 5-5 record. He overall did decent right here. So, Nature's Prophet is one that, despite not seeing a lot of it recently, I think we could see it a fair amount in the playoffs coming up, including EG. EG actually ran him, I'm double checking here. It looks like they ran him at least 4 times. They went 3-1 individually with the hero. So EG especially loves the hero. They went 3-1. And then it was kind of scattered here and there throughout a couple of other teams that ended up playing him too, whether it's not because they saw EG or if they thought of that themselves. But again, it's a hero that is making up or making an appearance more and more in the Kiev Major right here. So For those that are curious just to kind of hear where the meta's at with such event, well, that's one that perhaps we should expect to see again going into the brackets. Bristleback was another one that came to mind that actually we did see a couple of times. Saw him 6 times. He actually went 4-2 in those games. So that's kind of another one that could be interesting as far as having impact in the group stages. I don't want to get too much into stats just yet, guys, because we are going to be joined by Nahaz later on. So, and let's just say he has plenty of stats to talk about. So, not to overwhelm you at this point just yet with them, but those are just a couple of interesting ones that I found. And again, it's something to look forward to when it comes to the playoffs here. Now, going into the playoffs. Okay, so let's start previewing the playoffs now. So we've got the recap out of the way of the group stages, and so hopefully you have a pretty good idea of how it played out now. The playoffs right here, as a result of where you finish, again, it's 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, etc. There's some interesting matchups as expected. Now, first off, out of the matchups that we have, okay, so you know what I'll do here? I'll just run down real quickly. I'll just run down the matchups. I'm sure you've seen it for yourself too. Again, there's resources out there. Just to be clear, though, here on the podcast, to give you hopefully a visual. So here's how the playoffs are looking. We have IG versus Mouse, Liquid versus Newbie, DC versus VGJ, VP versus IGV, TNC versus Faceless, OG versus Random, Thunderbirds versus EG, and Secret versus SG Esports. So there you go. That's the rundown right there, the 8 matchups that we have here in the first round of the 16 teams. So kind of running through that, I'm sure there's a couple of those that stood out, depending on who you are, whatever team you're a fan of. Personally, I think there's a couple of really important ones here. Let's start with that side. So first off, there's 2 standout matches that I'm really looking forward to seeing. Actually, let's say 3. There's 3 that I'm very curious to see the results on in the first round. The first one being Thunderbirds versus EG. I think that no doubt, hands down, is the best first round matchup we have in terms of 2 very good teams going at it, in terms of it could go either way. I expect that to be a 3-game series, no doubt, because of how evenly matched these teams are, the history that they have. Of course, Thunderbirds, the former Digital Chaos team, they have history with EG, so it's kind of fun to see what is this quote-unquote North American battle here in the first round. Going at it, of course, EG finishing 8th place, or Thunderbirds technically finishing 8th place, EG finishing 9th place. Thus, they're facing each other in the first round. Personally, I have EG winning as far as my predictions go, but that is one I could see going either way. I really can. It's just those 2 teams are such evenly matched teams right there, and it's fun to see how that worked out, especially being the 8 versus 9 matchup. That just makes sense. So that's one that no doubt has to have probably the most hype out of all the first round matches going into the brackets right here. Yeah, it's been kind of funny, by the way. First off, just kind of a little bit of a tangent, but I've been seeing there was even a Reddit post that was put up, and there's people that have suggested that EG got a bad draw here in the brackets. Guys, there was a group stage Swiss format for a reason. These teams didn't get drawn into these places. They played matches. I hope that's clear. Like, they had to play matches to then get seeded into this bracket here. This wasn't just a random draw, or however the Valve or PGR or whoever felt. Now, you can make the argument that, sure, you're not the happiest with the Swiss format. Okay, that's fine, I guess. I think you're wrong. And I think, again, for the circumstances, this was just fine in terms of determining the seeding for the playoff bracket. EG should have done better. Thunderbirds should have done better. It just simply goes back to that. Yeah, EG's losses were both to TNC and IG, which proved to be very good teams. But if they didn't want to have to fall into a spot of being in the middle right there, they should have beaten those teams, which they can. Thunderbirds, the same story. Yes, their losses were to TNC and OG, which again are very good teams, but they should have beaten those teams, at least one of them, if they did not want to have a tough matchup here in this first round matchup. So not to suggest that those teams are complaining, but I've seen a lot of these fans out here, and from the tweets to these Reddit posts. To me, again, I get the idea of being a fanboy, and I can appreciate that, definitely, but guys, they were not drawn into this. This is where they were seated because of the matchups and because of their results right here. So let's just make that very clear right off the bat here. All right, now that that's out of the way. So yeah, Thunderbirds versus EG, the most hype matchup. Another matchup, though, that I'm really intrigued about is TNC versus Faceless. Now, a couple of reasons. One, because this is the battle of the two Southeast Asian qualified teams. Again, another case of, it's kind of interesting how they just managed to get matched up. Now, well, again, that's because of where they finished and the results right. You have the 4 versus the 13 seed in this case. Now, with how the group stages went, TNC should win the series. It should be a 2-0. This should be TNC dominating. However, history suggests Faceless is going to win the series. Now, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, unfortunately. I kind of wish I prepared a little bit better for this now. But simply put, apparently Faceless recently is undefeated in best-of-3 series against TNC. And we're talking about whether, in most cases, I believe it's just really on online events, to be fair. But simply put, they're undefeated against TNC when it comes to best-of-3s. So TNC definitely is in a precarious spot right here because not only are they going up against a team that they are winless against in series, but on top of that, they're going up against a team that knows them very well. And in fact, so I am looking back right here, just to kind of double check. They lost to them in the Southeast Asian qualifiers, of course, sending Faceless there. As far as before that, they did face off in the DAC qualifiers, it looks like, where they lost 2-0. They played in the Starlettered Star Series. This was back in 3 months ago. So, I mean, we're reaching, to be fair. We are reaching right here. We're talking to we're already going back to 3 months, and it's only like the 4th series in. So, it's not like they're playing a ton lately. But, again, history suggests that Faceless should win this series. However, when it comes to the group stages, this very, very recent result right here, again, I think it's safe to say TNC should and probably will win this. In fact, I do have them moving on in that matchup. But that's another one that'll be fun to keep an eye on as far as their first round goes. The last one that I'm definitely keeping an eye on is honestly Virtus Pro versus IGV. Now, I say this one because I think this has one of the best chances of being a pretty big upset. Yes, Virtus Pro, undefeated. They 3-0. They went 6-1 individual games, but again, 3-0. They got one of the 2 top seeds. When they got their matchup, though, when they found out they were playing IGV, I have to believe that they were not satisfied with that, or that they were not thrilled with that, I should say, because that's a tough matchup. IGV is a very good team when they want to be. Yes, in this case of the group stages, they frankly fell short, and they looked pretty bad at points. But even going back to, though, the results right here with the group stages, let's double check to see how that went. So IGV, their opponents, they lost to Random 2-1. They lost to VGJ 2-1. And then they lost at Mal's 2-0. That's the one for me that really stands out. Again, the other losses, it's like, okay, especially with them taking to 3 games. But then losing 2-0 to Mal's, I don't know if they were just depressed. I don't know if it was a case of they're demoralized, whatever it was, not to make excuses. But then, losing to 2-0 to Mal's, that makes you, okay, they clearly something's wrong with them. But they're getting a couple of days rest right here to now, figure out where their head's at. And it's just one best of 3. I mean, this is single elimination, baby. This is the playoffs. I love it. And this is going to set up for an opportunity to have an upset as a result. Virtus Pro, yes, they looked great. However, when you look at who they beat, I feel like that hurts them a little bit. Because, especially when you compare them to Team Secret. So if you look at, for example, if you look at the opponent records of Team Secret, they went 2-0 against VGJ, 2-0 against DC, 2-0 against Invictus Gaming. Their opponents' records were 13-10 individually. That's pretty good. Virtus Pro, on the other hand, they beat Faceless 2-0, they beat Random 2-1, and then they beat TNC 2-0. Their opponent's record, I actually didn't add this up before, let me double check real quickly. So you got 3-6, you got TNC 6-4, so we're looking at 9-10, and then we're looking at Random with 13-17. Their opponents' records were 13-17. You compare that to Secret's 13-10 opponents' records, And on top of all that, that Secret did not even drop a game where Virtus.pro did. So from that perspective, I'm a little hesitant to suggest that Virtus.pro, that Virtus.pro, despite even what others have been saying, is going to have a good time here in this event moving forward. I know that this is a team with a lot of hype. They are the quote-unquote home field advantage team. Being from the CIS region, of course, this being in Kiev right there, this is the home team that people are cheering for, no doubt. It was going to be this or Na'Vi. If Na'Vi was going, then holy crap, would have been crazy. But no, it's Virtus.pro, deservingly so. But as I stressed going into this event, Virtus.pro is definitely a team that I would not be surprised if they did not do well. And so I'm trying to be very clear here. I'm not suggesting that they're going to be upset in the first round because of that reason. But in fact, I do have them winning in my predictions. I do have them going to the quarterfinals. But when it comes to a match to look out for and not be maybe the most surprised if a big upset happens, it's that one right there. It's a mix of VP. Yes, they're that 2 seed. Are they really deserving though of the 2 seed? And then you have IGV. Yes, they struggled, but are they really deserving of a number 15 seed? I don't know if you feel the same way, but that's one, again, I would not be surprised if IGV wins that. In my case, I do have VP moving on, though. So those 3 matches right there are definitely the bigger standout matches here of the brackets, the playoff stages, whatever you want to call them. I personally like calling them playoffs, by the way. I don't even know what they're labeled as. I think main event, technically. I like playoffs, man. If we're going to have single elimination, why not just name it playoffs? The Kiev Major Playoffs. I like that. All right, so on the other side of the spectrum, there's 2 series where I personally am locked down. I would guarantee 100%, I feel very comfortable these results are going to happen. One is the Secret versus SG Esports. Again, I don't think there's any really reason to believe otherwise there. Secret just looked really good. I expected them to do very good in this event. Mid 1 is a freaking god here in this event so far. SG Esports, on the other hand, yes, they had that victory over OG in the first game, but again, if you were watching that game, I don't know how many people tuning into this got the chance to. I happened to stay up and at least watch that game. I stayed up and watched a fair amount, actually, a little bit more than I expected, which I'm kind of proud of myself of. But with the time zone difference, it was brutal sometimes. But point is, I watched that first game, and I couldn't help but just think the whole time I'm watching, I'm like, what the hell is OG doing? Like, this is clearly we just feel like trying random shit game, because that was not the OG that we should expect to see, nor that we ended up seeing in the end. I mean, they overall finished decent, and I think they're definitely still a team on track that could win this whole thing. Point is, SG Esports, outside of that, though, they have been looking as expected. And on top of that, I heard some insider information. In fact, they were talking about on the stream a little bit that apparently one of their players was feeling really sick during the group stages. God, what was his name? Let me see if I can pull up the name real quickly. It was HFN, actually, who's their carry player, sure enough. Apparently, he was feeling really sick. They played out with him. I don't know, they're going to get a couple of days of rest here, obviously, so if that'll still be the case when they actually play. The point is, Secret's going to win that game. That I'm confident in. The other one that comes to mind is IG versus Mouse. Maybe I'm riding this train a little too much. The fact that Mouse didn't deserve a invite in the first place. So you come to this event and they ended up finishing 15th seed. I kind of think helps establish that point. Oh, by the way, on that note, the top 4 teams here in the group stages were all qualified teams. That gave me a little bit of a smirk, a little bit of a smile almost. That's kind of funny to see, because to me that advocates wanting to play or having to play even between majors. The case that all these teams had to at least qualify for this event. And now on top of that, they're also getting top 4 in the groups. I'm just saying. In fact, in the top 8, 6 of the 8 teams were qualified teams. In the top 8, 75% of the teams were qualified. I'm just saying. Now, will an invite team win the event? Possibly. Possibly. I do have OG winning it all. I am just going to get that out of the way. OG, that it was the way before. My brackets were no different. I've stressed that in the last podcast. OG is my team. But again, I am a little happy almost to see that these qualified teams did so well when it came to the group stages. Now, it's a different story, obviously, in the main event of the playoffs here. So we'll see. Anywho, Invictus Gaming over Mal's. Point is, Mal's, they kind of lived up to expectations, and frankly, that wasn't much. That they lost all their series. Now, to be fair to their credit, they actually did go to Game 3 in both against Random and against VGJ. I got the chance to chime in a couple of their games. They looked like they were solid, but this is not the ad phenom of the Boston Major. It's not going to be the ad phenom of the Boston Major, guys. I know I have this Discord that I'm in fact, the .p Discord. You guys should check it out, by the way. There's a link on the website that you can find. It's pretty easy to find. We have a lot of chat in there, especially in the .pro or the pro-Dota channel. Anyways, where they were trying to suggest, man, I would love to see Mal's, repeat once again as the ad phenom of the Boston Major. I'm like, it's not happening, guys. Let's just get that out of the way. That's not happening. IG will win that series. So those are my two lockdown series I have of the first round. Outside of that, I'm not sure. I really am not sure. I could see so many of these going either way, including the OG versus Random series. That's another case. You talk about a team and team Random. Boy, are they random. Who knows which team is going to show up? They had glimpses here in the group stages where they actually looked pretty good. They took OG to 3 games. They took Virtus Pro to 3 games in the group stages. And God knows they have the experience. This is a team they're almost like, it's not like, I don't want to suggest that they have nothing to lose. I mean, I guess that is what I'm suggesting. They have nothing to lose, right? They're just coming off this news of the Wings gaming organization, how they kind of got screwed out of some money apparently, and just an ugly situation there. Thus why their team Random here in this event. They're just kind of going with the flow. And in fact, I was going to talk about it later on as well, but they also released statements on that whole situation. Some of the players did on Weibo over there in China, which is like a big, I guess, a news outlet over there in the Chinese region, that suggesting that their players, there was a couple things with that. We'll talk about that later on in the competitive surge segment of the show. But the point is, again, in a lot of ways, we don't know if they're even going to be a team after this event. It's kind of what I'm getting at. Will they be a team on a new organization? Will they even be a team together? We don't actually know. So, again, part of me believes that they have nothing to lose. So that's a match where I could see them winning. I hope they don't. I hope they don't, because obviously I have OG winning the whole thing, and I would like to at least be somewhat right on that. But it's possible. It definitely is. So there you go. Those are my brackets right there. As far as what I have my personal semifinals, I have Invictus Gaming versus DC, actually, going in the semifinals, and then OG versus Secret. Then I have OG versus IG in the grand finals, and then OG winning it all. Those are my brackets. You can check it out on my Twitter. I've posted it there in case you're curious to get a visual. But yeah, I do have DC over Virtus Pro. Again, it kind of goes back to my logic. I don't even know if Virtus Pro is going to get out of the first round, let alone beat a hot streak team in DC. That might be some NA bias there. But that's my final 4. DC, IG, and then OG versus Secret, with OG winning it all. All right, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this part of the podcast here, going over the Kiev Major. But, enough about my opinions. We have plenty of other guests to come on the show here to talk about their opinions and what they thought of the Kiev Major, both the group stages and now coming up with the main event here. So sit tight, guys. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to be joined by the one and the only Peter Pandam of Evil Geniuses to talk about the Kiev Major. Stay tuned, guys. So now I'm happy to be joined by, him as PPD from Evil Geniuses here. Peter, how's it going, man?
Good. Breaky, how are you?
I'm doing terrific. I'm doing awesome. You know, we have this this great event going on right now called the Kiev Major. I'm sure you've heard of it. We've been really kind of going over the group stages here of the show so far, but I wanted to bring you on and get you the chance to kind of get your take on what you think happened with the group stages and review it a little bit. So you get the chance to watch much of the group stages?
Yeah, the time schedule was a little tough for me being on the West Coast. Like the games were kind of starting when normally I should be going to bed. Like they were starting at like 10 or 11 p.m. PST, I think. And then they would run all the way up until probably about noon the next day. So I was kind of like laying in bed with my laptop trying to watch some games, and I would occasionally like coincidentally, I don't know if it was convenience or it was like that, I don't know, that fatherly kind of thing, like I wanted to watch EG, but I would just randomly wake up and EG would be on my laptop. So it's just like, oh, cool.
I did that a bit myself, actually, being the old man that I am. You know, I'd fall asleep thinking that I'm going to be staying up and then randomly wake up when a match is happening and be like, oh, this match is happening. Cool. Yeah, it was pretty tough with the hours, but
yeah, trying to watch Dota in bed never really works out. It's not. It's not one of those. It's not usually the kind of game that grips you. There's usually a nice like 10-minute break where there's not a lot of action going on and you don't really stand a chance of staying awake.
Well, I don't know about you. Actually, kind of on that note, it seemed like there was some longer matches at the Kiev Major here. Did you kind of feel that too? That where there was some drawn out match? Maybe that's the meta right now, or what?
Yeah, I think it's the meta right now. I've been playing actually a decent amount of pubs, and I think very rarely do I have a game that's underneath 50 minutes. So
yeah,
a lot of Midas, a lot of you could dominate. Like I think unless you totally dominate a game, which we saw, I think like maybe a couple of the games that were really one-sided, but most of the games were pretty even. And there's just a lot of like tools for high ground defense and delaying games and pushing things into the late game.
You know, since you brought up Midas, there's people out there that have been calling this the Midas Major. We've been seeing this item a lot. We see teams 4 different heroes, if not even 5 heroes, picking it up. What's the deal with Midas, man? Are you a fan?
Yeah, I buy it. I usually only play support in pubs nowadays, and a lot of times I play 4 position just because I make my random support player buy all the wards because I think I'm the best. I don't need to buy wards. But no, I buy Midas on every single hero that I play in pubs. I was streaming the other day, and my stream title was just buying Midas, and I just went Midas on every single hero, whether it was like Rubik, who has a level 10 GPM talent, Crystal Maiden, Warlock, Dazzle, whoever. Like it's too good right now to pass up. I think that even on like a lot of cores, it's really nice if you can farm it quickly.
So you think Valve kind of screwed up with the changes they made? They maybe overestimated how people like the gold on it?
No, I think they messed up with the talents. I think that the talents are the root cause of the Midas being purchased. Also, the ability to end the game by going high ground is way too difficult. So games are lasting incredibly long, and so the Midas's value, it's a time-based CD for gold and experience. The Midas is, not picking up a Midas, you're losing out on too much value throughout a game.
Gotcha. All right, well, enough about the Midas talk. Well, go ahead.
Well, no, I just have one more note. Like a lot of like in previous patches and stuff, like we would have games that would end at 15 minutes. I remember I lost at TI4 when Vici Gaming came high ground at like 12 minutes or something, or like 8, I don't know, something stupid. And if we had a Midas, which we our Alchemist, for this story, Alchemist did buy a Midas at the end, but the Midases don't. They provide you. They're worth more as an item the longer the game goes on, right? Because you get more uses out of them. If you buy a Midas and use it once or twice, you're getting 400 gold. It's not really worth it because it's a 2,000 gold item. It doesn't really start paying for itself until you get later into the game, and most games are getting to that point now. So not picking it up, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah. We saw plenty. It seems like most of all the teams are in agreement there. Speaking of that, one of those teams, of course, Evil Geniuses. So let's focus on them here now. Kind of take to them. Their performance, they ended up with that 2-2 record kind of in the middle right there. They're going to be matched up against Thunderbirds here, of course, in the first round. First off, what did you think of their performance in the group stages? Were you overall satisfied or what?
I'll speak as an EG fan. I think that people have expectations of them to be the number 1 team at a tournament. I know that they themselves have expectations of themselves to be the best team, but all in all, this is a group stage. Nobody got eliminated. There's still an opportunity for everyone to win the tournament. The only advantage is you get a potentially weaker opponent. So I think they did fine. I think that the loss against Newbie was probably the most troubling loss. Everyone saw the 2-0 against TNC and was like, oh no, but I think TNC ended up being like 3-1 or something and took out some really great teams. So they look like actually a pretty strong team this tournament. So losing to them maybe not the worst thing in the world, and EG is kind of known to have that slow start. So having a slow start and losing against one of the best teams at the tournament isn't really that big of a deal. I thought a lot of their wins looked really good. They had a couple of games that I thought they executed and drafted and played really well. But definitely there's a lot of things to learn from, and they have a 1 day break to kind of figure things out, I guess.
Yeah, the 1 day break here, and they're gonna have to be up. And are they playing on Thursday, by the way?
No, they have a 2 day break actually. They don't play till day 2.
Yeah, so at least they get a little bit longer here and to prepare for what's Thunderbirds, a team that it's safe to say they should be familiar with, of course. What did you think when you saw that they were matched up against Thunderbirds? Were you happy with that, or are you a little worried for your team even?
No, I'm not. I'm never worried about the guys. I'm not worried about the guys of the team or anything like that. That's just, winning and losing is a part of esports, and they are they're the most aware of that. You could show up to a tournament and lose all your games, and then you get last place. That's the end of it. And here, they knew what they're signing up for. We got a best or single elimination major. They're gonna go, and they're either gonna beat Thunderbirds or they're gonna lose, and they're either gonna advance in the tournament or they're gonna get last place. And that's really just kind of the beginning and the end of it for me as a fan of EG and for them as a fan of themselves. I think it's more interesting to see how they handle that win or loss and translate that into TI, because I think TI is kind of the sum of everything you've been doing in this season. And you can have they got like third, fourth at the last major, which is a pretty good result, but they were still disappointed. And that's because everybody wants to be number one. And with TI coming up, that's like the only thing that really matters. $3 million is a lot of money. $20 million is a ridiculous amount of money. So, and the stakes are different. Of course, people will remember you for all the majors that you won, but like being a TI winner, that's something that I hear every single day when I stream. It's no matter what. I could be playing a card game. I could be playing The Witcher. I was playing Undertale on my stream the other day, and for somehow it's like a meme. It's like a reference. It'll be something that everybody knows me for the rest of my life. They're like, oh, he won TI.
Yeah.
So it's different, and it's not like, oh, he won a major. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that it's the Super Bowl of Dota 2. People remember
exactly.
that.
Exactly. It's almost the Super Bowl of esports.
Yeah.
It's the biggest event. I think it gets the most attention out of almost any kind of esports tournament ever, and it's awesome that we get to be a part of that.
All right, so the Swiss format, this is the first time at a major at least that they've ran this style of format. Would you be happy if they run it at TI, speaking of it from that perspective, or do you still think that there needs to be changes made?
I wasn't paying as much attention to the tournament as I should have in terms of like the group stage and the formatting and everything. I just kind of like wanted to log on and like watch. I just want to watch good Dota. But to me, I think the format almost seemed like a little too complicated.
Okay.
Just like, do you understand? Like, I felt like there was way too many moving elements, and I didn't really know who was playing who next and who was going to be playing who in the playoffs. And I guess I like things to be a little bit more laid out. And yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's fun. It's fun to have a different format. I thought it was a little complicated, to be honest.
I'm with you there, that especially at the very end, even with like 2 matches remaining, it was still like, wait, what happens if they lose? Like, who are they going to play in the playoff? It was hard to definitely figure that out. So I'm with you there for sure.
Yeah. So like, for example, like VP and Secret, or like couple teams only played 3 rounds, right? Or was that just VP and Secret? It
was also the losing teams as well, the 0-3 teams.
Okay. And then, so how, I guess, how do they determine between first and second, who played 15th and 16th?
So basically, it came down to the individual games in this case. So Secret, because they went 6-0 in their games, where VP went 6-1, Secret was the top seed. And then same thing with SG Esports and IG Vitality. SG Esports had one less win.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, that makes sense, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, so but no, I could definitely understand that even an experienced, player yourself and with all these tournaments, it's still a little confusing. If it's confusing for you, then it must be confusing for many out there.
I gotta think so. I gotta think I gotta think maybe I'm not just the dumb one who just can't keep up.
Let's go with that.
Maybe I am. Who knows? Whatever.
Wow.
Doesn't matter to me.
All right, so yeah, perhaps some fine tuning, maybe even an extra round, or perhaps just changing it up so it's not as confusing. Yeah, that's something.
I think if I would have listened to I generally don't listen to like the panels in between the games very much. So I imagine like Red Eye and stuff explained it very in detail to everyone. So maybe I just missed out on the explanation.
They tried. They had some graphics made, but even with that, again, it's a lot of numbers. It's a lot of things to keep in mind. So, all right, so. Again, I'm sure you've watched, a fair amount of EG, but what about in general of the group stages? Was there any hero pick specifically, or even a full-on draft that really caught your attention that you're like, wow, I did not expect that?
I saw a bunch of PL, I guess, especially out of Secret, who arguably had one of the, arguably should number one seed, right? So they arguably had the best group stage, and they were playing a lot of PL. I saw at least a couple times. I saw them playing Bounty Hunter, which was cool. There was a lot of Bounty Hunter and Ricky kind of making a comeback in the meta, which is nice to see. I saw Sumail actually play Tiny in the game. That was kind of fun. But not too many surprises. I think that there aren't very many surprising heroes in Dota nowadays. Treant was getting a lot of priority, and being known for being a Treant player, I don't necessarily agree with all of his popularity, but if he does get to the point where he gets a Midas and he can go late game, obviously getting Ags on Treant, and that's the king of late game. So that can be super good. But I saw the hero getting first pick some games. I just didn't really agree with it, to be honest.
Focusing more on heroes here, Monkey King, of course, was a popular topic coming into the event, and he proved to be popular at the event. He was tied for the most played hero with Crystal Maiden at top. However, he only had a 35% win percentage in 31 games.
Yeah, he got nerfed a bit. Yeah, I think he's. I don't necessarily know where teams are rating him right now. Obviously, if he's the most picked, they rate him decently high. We might see a little bit of a change of that in the playoffs, but I think that he did get nerfed a little bit after DAC, and I think that people have learned how to play against him a bit better. Just what to expect out of him on the map, deep wards by him jumping around in trees and him kind of being ready to attack all of your lanes. There's a lot of unfamiliarities at DAC with that hero. Mm-hmm.
Arc Warden was actually another hero we got to see. A couple of teams, including OG, played him a couple of times. Faceless. Arc Warden, I don't know if you got to really see those games yourself. Was that maybe a surprise?
That was OG picked that in the game that they lost to the Brazilian team, right?
Yes.
The Brazilian team's one win in the group stages was against OG's Arc Warden. So I think that probably speaks for the hero itself. I think that hero, I don't have a lot of experience with the hero, and I know in pubs he can be super frustrating. He is a hero that gets double Midas, so there's definitely got to be something to be said there. But I don't think it's a very good hero. I don't think he has the right toolkit for the game, and maybe he could slot in as a support, possibly. I just don't think he has enough impact as a core hero in most cases.
One more I wanted to bring up that I'm sure others are very curious on your opinion too. Nature's Prophet, we actually saw a fair amount of several different teams running, including AG, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I kind of like Nature's Prophet. I think that was a hero that people were kind of a little bit on the fence about picking at DAC. And I guess the current Thunderbirds and Moon Meander playing Furion is kind of probably the team and the player pushing the hero the most. Probably influenced a lot of other teams to give it a try. Whether they saw Moon playing with it in pubs or Thunderbirds playing with it in scrims. Yeah. So the hero's definitely out there now. I like him. I think he speeds up the game. He's a Midas carrier. You can actually punish teams for kind of going Midas. So that's kind of nice. You can take a lot of towers. You could even potentially high ground earlier than most lineups could. Not that going high ground early is the best option, I think, in this meta, but you could swing a push strat out, I imagine.
Chinese Dota has been very interesting. In between, they play a lot. They play a lot more than the North American European scene when it comes to their games against one another. However, both at the Boston Major, as you're very well aware of, they had 6 teams there. Only one team even made it to the quarterfinals, and then they lost it there. And then here, it's kind of similar in the sense IG was the only team that finished in the top 8 of the group stages out of China, of the 5 teams that are there. Do you feel like Chinese Dota is maybe overestimated as far as what they should be doing? Are they overrated even? Or are they just having disappointing results?
I think that IG brought a lot of promise to the Chinese Dota, kind of like at DAC, by winning and being so dominant and kind of defeating OG, who has otherwise been kind of Titans. But we haven't seen Secret at a lot of tournaments. We haven't seen Virtus Pro at a lot of tournaments. We haven't seen TNC at a lot of tournaments. So these are a couple of teams that have come out really hot and are doing really well, and they kind of put the Chinese teams like back towards the bottom, where, honestly, like maybe that's where they just are right now. I think IG is super good. Their only loss was to Secret, the best team at the tournament so far. And like TNC as well, right? Like they lost to Virtus Pro 2-0?
Yeah.
So like IG and TNC are not far behind. And they're definitely like 2 of the best teams here. So China Dota, I don't know, it's just been so bad ever since the streaming deals started coming out, honestly, and that was like almost over 2 years ago now. And Wings was like a big exception at TI6, and other than that, like it's just been, they're just not as good as they used to be for whatever reason. I mean, the game has changed, their priorities have changed. I don't think they practice as hard as they usually did, and other teams probably practice more than, the Western teams probably practice more than they used to do. So
do you, now that you mentioned that, I'm kind of interested in your opinion on this topic where, as I mentioned, Chinese Dota, they do play a lot more matches than the North American European top teams, including EG, OG, Secret up there. Nahaz released that one stat where something like between the top 5 teams of each of the regions, they played against each other, I think it was like 85 times for the Chinese scene compared to like 22 times for the North American European scene. Is that something that's overvalued, that teams like an EG needs to play more in between majors, or would you like to see them play more?
I think that there's definitely a point to be said that the Western teams aren't playing enough, but I think that's more so for the ecosystem of watching competitive Dota. I think that I don't think, my favorite Dota teams are playing as much as I want to watch them. I think there's a demand, right, for that. Like, I want to watch OG versus Secret or EG versus DC. I want to see that at least every month. You know what I mean? And it's like every couple of months we might get to see it if they match up in a big tournament. So there's definitely a demand for it. But it's also like a big problem with majors and TI is that this year we have 2 majors for $3 million, and then we have a TI for potentially like $20 million. And then we have a bunch of other tournaments that probably total up to, $5 or $6 million total for 12, 13, 14, 15 tournaments or something. And that's great. Like, that's a lot of money, and teams are definitely going to play in those. But I think a lot of the Western teams, people think, they're not playing, like, they're not practicing as much. They're practicing. These guys are playing 5-6 days a week, and they're doing, 1 to 2 best of 3s or a best of 5 kind of a thing. But it's just not publicized, so people don't get to watch them. Everybody is training super hard, and I think that could be part of the advantage for the Western teams, is that they are scrimming and practicing and learning and being very specific. Their main focus isn't always just on winning. They're trying to push the meta to a new place or figure out what might potentially work for them in this upcoming tournament against this upcoming team. The practice is much more specific, and they're really trying to learn what works for them as a team rather than what works for them in this tournament. And by the Chinese teams like playing against each other all the time, I don't really know. I mean, I can't speak because I don't know how much they're actually practicing. But then again, I don't really know how much Thunderbirds is practicing either. Do you know what I mean? Or any of these Western teams, like Team Liquid, I don't know how much they play. I know how much EG plays, and they play all the time. Like they're constantly training and practicing. So maybe China's just behind in their work ethic, and that's why they're not doing as well as people expect them to.
That's an interesting take. Yeah, just because we're not seeing them as the public doesn't mean they're not playing. And clearly a team like EG and these other teams are playing at least a certain amount because they're looking good at an event here in Kiev Major.
It's a full-time job for players. Being a part of esports, I mean, like your job is your life. That's what it is. Like these players spend probably 6 months or like at minimum 6 to 7 months in hotels or at the team house boot camping.
Yeah.
So it is their lives, and if people think that they're not like practicing hard enough or committing enough, then they're most likely mistaken. But there's something like they could be practicing harder. You know what I mean? They could be there 12 months, a year.
Well, that's a topic I would love to talk with you more about in a future podcast here, but I don't want to keep you too long. So I do want to get one more question from you, though, concerning the Kiev Major here, and that's the ultimate question. You know, it would be easy if I just asked you, what team's going to win it. Of course, you respond EG. What team outside of Evil Geniuses do you think has the best shot?
I think Virtus Pro might make a run of it. Really? I really like that team. I expected them. I mean, they got kind of unlucky at Boston Major playing up against EG in round 2. And then also like having OG on that side of the bracket. I think if VP was on the opposite side of that bracket, they probably would have met OG or EG in the grand final. So I like Virtus Pro. If I had to pick a team to kind of run the tournament, it'd probably be them. I think, besides EG, obviously. But yeah, I don't think OG. I think OG might do well. I don't think they're going to win this tournament. I actually don't even think they're going to be on the podium for a top 3. I think Secret or VP for sure. I mean, that's a really easy thing. They're number 1 and 2 seed, but I'll be edgy and I'll go with the 2 seed team.
Okay, Virtus Pro. They are looking good. They looked good in groups, and they looked good going into the Boston Major last time around. And then, of course, to be fair, they got knocked out by EG in that match.
Those were some amazing games. Like it was super close. So
yeah, a team that has proven themselves before. We'll see if they have the run there. That home field advantage too, you could say, of where they're at. So definitely a possibility. All right, Peter, want to thank you for joining me, man. Really do appreciate it as always. And obviously we'll be watching the main event here, and best of luck to EG. So we'll see.
Yeah, no problem, man. Happy to be here and happy to talk about Dota, and all the best for you with this podcast. It seems interesting.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Okay, so thanks again to Peter for joining us here. Always awesome to get his take on, really anything when it comes to Dota 2 especially. I know a lot of people out there appreciate him sharing his opinions, and there's a lot of people out there that would have liked to see him at the Kiev Major as a analyst. Unfortunately, he wasn't there, but those that got invited, I will say, again, from what I've been tuning into, Aoi and Rose especially have been doing a great job. So, but I always am a fan of seeing Peter myself at said events, and I'm sure there'll be more to come for him. So, anyways, guys, before we get to our next guest, what I want to kind of do here is kind of go over more stats here, as mentioned. That's talked about in the initial segment there from the Kiev Major Group Stages. Some stats, at least, that stood out to me personally and what you may find interesting. Now, I know not everyone's a stats guy or person or whatever, or lady even, so... But if you aren't, then maybe you could skip ahead if you'd like to. But I find it entertaining, and it's kind of a good way to kind of gauge where things are at. And if you're a Dota 2 fan, though, of the competitive scene, I would think that you'd find it at least somewhat interesting. Anyways, the point is, here's a couple that stood out to me. One, when we talk about heroes that were both seen and won a lot, well, Templar Assassin actually right now is leading that prediction. Of course, there's in the predictions right there was a couple of fun hero ones as far as which hero would have the highest, kills, whatever. Which hero would have the highest win percentage? Now, they have to play a minimum of 5 games to be able to be eligible for it. Right now, TA is leading as far as being eligible. TA has been played 9 times. She's won 7 of those games. She actually has an 88, basically an 89% winning percentage as a result. So, we'll see if that keeps up into the playoffs here. Obviously, there's still a lot of matches to come, so not to get caught up too much as far as how this is looking. But from the group stages alone, TA did very well, and I don't think that's necessarily the most surprising when you really think about it. The hero's honestly pretty ridiculous with that refraction buff of hers, a very solid mid laning option in general, and one that could snowball for her team, be a great presence all throughout the game. Even that late game can transition nicely into it. So yeah, I can't say, although maybe a little bit of surprise, it's not that surprising. A little surprising as far as initially coming into the event, not expecting to see her, but now that we do see her in hindsight, it's like, okay, maybe it's not so much. So she was up there. Enigma's actually right behind her, to be fair. He's only been seen 6 times, but he won 5 of those games. So he is also up there and definitely is contesting for that spot. Now, one other one I want to mention is one that I happen to predict, which was also maybe not the most popular one. I predicted Slark for mine, and it's still possible, but Slark actually was seen 9 times, and he won 7 of those games. So he's 7-2 right now from the groups. Again, it's actually possible depending on the brackets play out right here. I thought I gave some sound logic on that initially, so I'm kind of hoping that one makes me look really smart. But so far, again, he's at least in the running. But TA right now is leading the way overall. Lycan actually was seen 3 times. He actually won all of those games. So he's also, if he gets played a couple more times and happens to win, then you never know. Secret played him a couple times, and Liquid actually random one. So Lycan's kind of a fun hero that we could definitely see in the brackets as well because of that little success there. As far as heroes that were the most picked, Monkey King and Crystal Maiden actually tied for the most picked. But the fun stat there, Monkey King was 35% win percentage. What? Why? That I think suggests that maybe there's a little bit of overhype going on with the hero. I think it's a little too low to be just simply coincidence that the teams picking him up happen to be losing, but 35% win percentage for the most picked hero, something's off there. And it's going to be interesting to see how that, I got to think teams also look at these stats, and I understand that, that they're not going to take stats at 100%, nor should they, because every team's going to play the hero differently and, get a different feel with it. And in different drafts, it'll be better, but... And I'm not saying Monkey King is a bad hero either, but maybe he's not this first pick top priority hero that teams are clearly making him out to be. So, meanwhile, Crystal Maiden, who's also been picked 31 times, she has a 55% win percentage, basically. So, 20% more win percentage on Crystal Maiden than Monkey King, who have been tied for the most picked. Lena's actually another one that kind of stands out, kind of looking at the list too. She has been played 20 times, but she actually only has a 35% win percentage herself. So maybe a little bit, obviously she had those talent changes recently and people kind of still stuck in that from before, but lately she has gone downhill as far as that list goes right there. So those are kind of some fun hero stats that I noticed. By the way, the most banned hero, no, that's another intriguing one, perhaps. Tree and Protector, not surprised there. The 39 bans. The next closest was actually Monkey King, who had 28 bans to go with that. But, I could sit here just kind of going through all these numbers forever and talk about them, but somebody that's actually better at presenting these numbers and, frankly, more entertaining when it comes to this, I'm sure, Nahaz is that guy. So I'm going to be happy to be joined by Nahaz here. You know him as the statsman himself. Many do, at least. Nahaz, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure to be on DotP.
Yeah, so you're familiar with DotP?
Oh, yeah. I know Roland and Cyphus from several years back. Really, really great guys and big fan of the show.
Nice. I've become known of them more lately, to be honest. I wasn't very aware of DotP myself, but hey, now I'm hosting a podcast show. Like a month later after meeting them. So definitely having fun here. They are good guys, though. I agree there. So some great content they're putting out. We're hoping to put out some great content here, and thus having you on. So really excited to have you on because I personally am a stats guy myself to an extent. In traditional sports, I've always been a numbers guy for the most part. So I find myself, using these sites and the resources that we have with Dota as well to kind of look at these numbers. And it seems like you have plenty to talk about when it comes to numbers at the Kiev Major, Nahaz.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so first of all, we just got our big resource, .dota.com, back online after an extended hiatus. So there are a number of things that we can break down that had been kind of a lot of work to look at before. I'm looking at, performance, not just by drafting, but by phase, a lot of player records that had been kind of cumbersome to compute before, easy now. So it's a lot of fun. And the information is very useful because, in particular, we've had the meta shift just dramatically in a very short period of time. Of the top 7 most picked heroes at DAC, which was a $600,000 tournament that ended just a couple of weeks ago, only one of those heroes is again in the top 7 so far at Kiev, and that's Monkey King, who has a pretty abysmal win rate, only about 35%. So definitely a lot of new heroes coming to the fore.
That was one of the bigger things I noticed. Exactly as you said right there. Monkey King, 31 times to up there with Crystal Maiden as far as tied for the most, but 35%. What is going on? What do you think just on that perspective? Do you think the hero's overrated, overused, or is that because as you say, stats don't lie? I mean, is that the case?
Well, so when you talk about Monkey King and you talk about Earth Spirit, those two supports have sort of played their own role over the last couple iterations of the meta. They've been roaming supports that are able to threaten very, very large areas of the map. And when you talk about drafting in general and you talk about picking your supports in a draft, you always have to be careful picking both of your supports very, very early on, because if you do, you create situations where the opponent can really punish you in lanes. They know what the lane matchups are going to look like from a very early state, and you can pick laning matchups that are very unfavorable to your team's supports. Monkey King and Earth Spirit had sort of been immune to that because of their just ridiculous roaming potential and their ability to threaten large areas of the map from very, very early on in the game. The 7.05 nerfs were direct nerfs to their early roaming potential. Earth Spirit's slow got nerfed by almost half in duration at level 1. Monkey King, obviously, his leap scales now much worse at the early levels. And so these two supports, when they get picked now, are subject to sort of some of the same kind of lane punishes that you see applied to other supports. And so Monkey King in particular, you've seen this hero get punished much, much more in laning matchups.
So I want to focus on another topic that's been a very hot one, and thanks to you, even you've been bringing this up quite a bit yourself, both in these videos that you've been doing and just on Twitter. I've been noticing Midas. Midas. Oh my God, this item. It's being called a Midas Major by many people. What is the deal with Midas? What are the numbers on that?
So for good reason, we don't have all of the match statistics parsed yet, but I can tell you we've seen a total of 73. We've seen a total of 219 Midases built in the 73 games that we have data for. We're still trying to track down this one last match, but that's 3 Midases per game. Jeez. And if you look back at all the events since TI5, there's never been an event where we've had, I believe, more than 1.5 Midases per game on average. So we're on pace. If this continues through the playoffs, which I actually don't necessarily expect it will, we're going to have twice as many Midases built per game on average as any other event that we've seen in the last 2 years. Now, the thing is, there are just teams that have gotten way, way carried away with this and have gotten super punished very, very hard. So by my count, again, we'll have the final statistics on this a little bit later. I'll share this out via Twitter. But by my count, 4 and 5 Midas strats are 2 and 7 overall. And we've seen some very, very high profile series where really good teams got punished super hard. You saw Thunderbirds build 9 Midases in 2 losses against TNC after they'd won the first game. And you saw, in particular, IG in their 0-2 loss against Secret. They built 2 Midases in the first game. They built 4 Midases in the second game. And it's telling to me, Secret, who's been the best team in the tournament so far, has built a total of 5 Midases in 6 games. They have only one player, that's that's Pile I Die, that's built it more than once, and he's built it twice on Crystal Maiden and once on Warlock. And those are heroes that Midas is probably in the core. right? But a lot of these other minus builds, I think, are highly questionable. And I think there are a lot of teams that if they continue to do this in the playoff bracket are going to get punished for it.
Yeah, and that's a very telling number right there. The top team, the least played with the item, at least it sounds like, and it makes it the only heroes that are picking up are the ones that you would expect it on, if anything. So,
yep.
Very, very. By the way, is it really Midases? That's the plural.
I have no idea. Okay. I think that is the plural. With a lot of these things, it's pretty much like what sounds good. I remember a while back there was a story. And I'm pretty sure this is true because I've had it repeated by a lot of people who would know that there is I believe the correct Greek pronunciation of Aegis is like Aegis or something like that. And somebody once told this to Ice Frog, and Ice Frog said, "I don't care. I want people to say it Aegis because Aegis sounds stupid to me." So, you go with whatever sounds good.
Fair enough. Okay, so we got the hand of Midas out of the way now as far as the numbers for that. What about players themselves? Because there was definitely some standout players at these group stages, at least for this event. One that definitely comes to mind, Mid One, had some great performances. I know, I believe it was Raven for TNC. Yeah. In fact, Raven, that number right there, the what was it, the 33 kills, the most
33
ever?
Kills. Most ever at a single match at a Valve event, and just a kind of an unbelievable accomplishment for a player that we all know is very talented. I mean, this guy has performed on the main stage at TI, but this was kind of on another level. This was a Spectre game where he just absolutely and this is against a good team. This was against Thunderbirds, where he just absolutely took them apart. Raven has actually been very, very good for quite some time. If you go all the way back to, I believe, since the release of 6.88 last June, he actually has the highest KAD average, kills plus assists over death. He has the highest KAD average in all of professional Dota 2. But this was kind of a performance on another level. And then, of course, you talk about Abed put up a 40 assist game on his Ember Spirit. Puppy so far, a stat that has really flown under the radar. Puppy, it's only 6 games, but he's actually been in on over 90% of Secret's team kills. He's been on 141 of their 156 kills so far in the tournament with a 5.8 KAD as a support. So, I mean, we all talk about Puppy as a captain. We talk about Puppy as a leader and as a drafter, but Puppy, the player, has really showed up at this major.
Yeah, he plays heroes like Bounty Hunter and Ricky, I know, 2 more popular ones perhaps in the event. So getting himself involved. He has a pretty broad support hero pool, and if you go, he's actually a heck of a CM player. If you go way, way back, Puppy had about a 2 or 3 year period where he averaged like 3k damage a game with Freezing Field on Crystal Maiden. And this was before the big AoE buffs. This was like before anybody really knew how to use that ability. He's a very, very good CM player. Yeah. So actually, kind of on the note, sticking with the player still, is there an MVP you feel like of the group stages, just like from numbers that just impress you? Sounds like Puppy was definitely impressive, but would he be your MVP overall, or is there another player that comes to mind?
I think I would tend to lean toward Ramses. Ramses is only player over 700 GPM. He's number 1 in KDA. And he's just had some really dominating single game performances. I think you look at Mid One, and he's shown up. He tweeted, I think back when the invites first came out, he tweeted something like, "All you invited teams, I'm coming for you."
That was before they qualified, by the way.
Yes, exactly. He's had over 0.3 kills per minute so far in the tournament, and nobody else is over 0.25. But when you look at just the raw numbers that Ramses has been able to put up for VP, I give him a slight edge so far. Of course, I mean, this has kind of been. You would be remiss not to mention Boboka, which his stats don't really reflect just the ridiculous impact that he's had. I mean, I think a lot of people in the Chinese scene have been talking about this guy as like little B God for a long time. Yeah. But when you talk about the impact that he's had at DAC and so far in this tournament, and we're talking, he has stepped up against big teams, against your OGs, against your EGs. I mean, this is a guy that it is very, very rare to have a team like OG look like they just can't deal with a single player on the other side. This is a team that makes adjustments as well as anybody in the pro game. And for them to just look like they can't deal with one of the enemy team's players, like they have no answer for it, and for that player to be a support, it's just ridiculous.
One thing that really kind of stood out to me, and again, I don't have numbers in front of me to back this up, I'm kind of hoping you do on this, the average game length duration overall by chance, because it felt like the games were just longer at this major than perhaps previous ones.
They got longer. I made a big deal in my competitive predictions about the fact that we haven't had a game go beyond 80 minutes in a very long time at a Valve event. I don't necessarily know that you're going to see like a 85, 90 minute game, but we've started to see a lot more 60 and 70 minute games than we've been seeing recently. And again, part of it is because if you look at, I'll use VP as an example. Okay. So VP's played 7 games and all 4 of their wins are below 35 minutes. And the remaining 3 games are all above 50 minutes. There are a lot of teams that are sort of, and Lil actually kind of mentioned this to me in conversation. There are a lot of teams that feel like they don't necessarily completely understand the meta yet. And so there are a lot of teams that are approaching this meta as, we know that this is a meta where, split pushing is back and where there's going to be an opportunity to win relatively early. There's going to be an opportunity to win between 30 and 35 minutes. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of players that feel like there's enough that can go wrong. And if 1 or 2 things go wrong in your 35-minute plan, you better darn well have a 50-plus minute contingency. And that's where I think a lot of the Midases are coming from. It's sort of the insurance value. A lot of teams are sort of, they don't necessarily have their strats all polished yet for the new meta, as we talked about, not just the hero picks, but the pace of the game changing a lot in a short period of time, split pushing coming back. And so I think a lot of teams are saying, well, we feel like we have to build a Midas or 2 just in case we get into some of these super long matches.
Wasn't on that topic too? Wasn't there? I think it might have even been a Reddit post about Team Liquid and how you even posted a stat about them, how a certain duration their win loss goes down the drain.
Yeah,
basically,
it's a very weird stat too. This is a stat that I never thought that I would be giving for a Kuro led team, but over the last 3 months, they're 16-1 in games between 20 and 40 minutes, and they're 14-16 in games longer than 40 minutes.
Jeez.
It's just a dramatic split, and I can tell you, albeit we didn't have the greatest success, one of the things I learned working with Complexity last year is that it's not just about fixing mistakes. When you have a problem with a particular phase in the game, like Cole last year, one of the problems that we had, they would pick these lineups that were really good at early pushing, and they would tend to push into the enemy base at around like 25 minutes and take a tier 3 tower and then and damage Iraqs, but they would tend to get punished very, very severely on the disengage. Okay. And it gets in your head. It's not just the fixing of mistakes, because you can look at replays and you can say, okay, we did this here and this hero needed to be in this position here, and we wouldn't have given up. We'd have given up 1 kill instead of giving up 4. That's fine, okay? But when a team has a problem with a particular phase of the game, they start playing scared of it. And what I've seen in Liquid in a couple of games is, I think they've really, around that 35 to 45 minute mark, they've really started pressing. They feel like they may have an issue in the late game, and you start pressing to try to avoid getting there. And that really compounds the problem. Liquid, they have one of the greatest captains in Pro-Dota history in Kuro. They have a tremendously smart coach and analyst in Heen. They're going to be able to fix this. But it's really important, not only do you have to make the strategic adjustments, but you have to change that mindset in a very short period of time going into the playoff bracket.
Yeah. How are your predictions looking? I know you're big on doing those. Have you been tracking that? I'm sure you have, as far as how you've been doing
great.
With those.
The compendium predictions are awful, and it's simply, I shouldn't say awful. I'm probably going to end up doing decently well, but the biggest thing is, you look at these tournaments, and it's very hard to predict when the meta is going to shift. The patches so far, the 7.0x patches have been fairly incremental, and they haven't changed the meta much. And so I thought it was a pretty fair assumption that you could look at the stats out of DAC and base the compendium predictions very heavily on those. So I'll give you the example. So most picked hero, okay? CM had been crazy spiking in DPL and in some of the SEA qualifier games after DAC. But when you looked at the most picked hero in most of the tournaments, if you looked at the most picked hero in most of the tournaments in DAC and before, it was Rubik pretty consistently. And so there's always this choice that you have to make. Do you go with the hero that would be suggested by the historical data, even the recent historical data, or do you go with these heroes that people are saying, oh, wow, we're starting to see this banned and picked a lot in scrims. We're starting to see it picked a lot in online games and in in-house leagues. And in this case, it's really been sort of the scrim and in-house meta that's been really, really big. But that's not always the case. I can go back to other tournaments where a lot of heroes got talked about as being really big in scrims, and then they were never seen in the tournament. So it's always a little bit of a roll of the dice there. But I think that's part of what has made the tournament so good so far is the Swiss format has worked out amazingly well in the group stage. This has been by far the most fun I've had watching a group stage. And the fact that the meta has shifted so much. So we've gotten to see some new heroes at the top of the board. We've gotten to see things like Arc Warden mid, although that hasn't been particularly successful.
Yeah.
OG need to stop picking that hero. They're 0-3 with it. But those two things together, I think have really worked out well.
That's an interesting take on that. It's the idea that you're almost happier that my predictions or your predictions aren't right, because it's like that means we're having some odd stuff. We're having some fun stuff, perhaps, when it comes to the event. So,
and that's the thing that you learn this doing economic predictions is you don't. Yes, at the end of the day, you do put your money on one prediction, but you really have to have a good understanding of the spectrum of things that can happen. You really have to have a good understanding of all the reasons that you could be wrong as well as right. And in a lot of cases like this one, there are a lot of picks that I made that are going to end up being wrong that I don't necessarily feel that bad about. I mean, I feel bad I'm costing people their hats, but you look at this and you say, first of all, it's making for an exciting tournament, and maybe do things a little differently next time.
All right, so not even thinking about who you're biased for, just trying to take all that out, just looking at the numbers, which team is set up to win Kiev Major 2017 for you, just by the numbers?
Well, I think if you go strictly by the numbers, I think IG and Secret both have very doable paths to reach the grand finals. If you assume that everybody is going to play about how we saw in the group phases, which by the way is probably in some cases a bad assumption. Okay, but if you go by the numbers and you assume that people are going to play like they played in groups, I think it's IG Secret in the grand finals, and that's what I have in my compendium bracket. Now, there's always the possibility. So I look at a team like DC. Okay, the new DC squad with featuring Abed, who's been absolutely unbelievable. They're a good example of a team where their group phase performance is sort of like reverse Liquid. Okay, all 5 of their losses have been under 36 minutes. 4 out of their 5 wins were 50-minute plus. So you look, this is a late game team. At the same time, though, they got a guy in their captain in Dubu he's an MVP alum. I mean, this is a guy that knows how to pick team fight lineups that can roll over you in the mid game. So you really look at DC and you say, we know that they can win by basically playing the new version of 4 Protect 1 around Abed, but I have a feeling that this and a couple other teams probably have some strats in reserve, and that makes them pretty dangerous in the playoff bracket.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nahaz, always a pleasure, man, to talk numbers with you and talk about the Kiev Major here. So I really do appreciate you coming on. As I mentioned earlier, you've been releasing these videos here. I assume you plan to do that throughout the brackets too, or?
I'm gonna try. Unfortunately, my wife just got called out of town, so I'm 1v1 mid versus my 3-year-old daughter for the next couple of days while the tournament's going on. But no, I'm gonna try to release some content during the tournament. If nothing else, I've actually just I've had a lot of fun doing it the last couple of days and gotten some really wonderful feedback from the community. So this is something that I'm gonna try to do both for this tournament and for future events.
Absolutely. Well, where can people check out those videos? What's your YouTube channel called?
It's youtube.com/NahazDota. You can Google Stats Don't Lie, which is the name of the series, and you'll get my videos. Follow me on Twitter @NahazDota. As you mentioned earlier, I tend to spam people's timelines with Dota 2 stats, which
I love it.
I always feel bad for my non-Dota followers, but it's a lot of fun. We really do have a lot of fun with the numbers during these events, and even a number of the players have come up to me and said, "Hey, it's really cool to know when you break a record or when you do something that's unprecedented in one of these games." So, I think it's good. It's good for the game. A lot of fans like it, and it's definitely something that I'll keep doing.
Couldn't agree more. @NahazDota, guys, check him out if you haven't yet, and if you're any bit of a fan of stats and numbers, he's the guy to go to. So, thanks again, Nahaz. Really do appreciate it, man.
Very welcome. Always a pleasure to be on DotP.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I got the chance to watch a fair amount of the group stages here. I'm an old man, just hit 30 years old, soon to be 31 here. So yeah, so old. I happened to stay up the best that I could at least. I watched a fair amount of it. The point is that I got the chance to enjoy the tournament itself, but I was also pretty impressed by the production in a lot of ways as far as what they did. Yes, there was the typical occasional lag issues. I think the main stream did go down a couple of times, in fact. But overall, I was definitely impressed with what they were able to put on. Makes me really excited for the main event as well. In fact, PGL has a great history of doing some fantastic stuff when it comes to showing off, the stats, especially of the players and the teams and everything. And they had that cool thing where the panel desk was actually there, and then in the middle of the panel desk, essentially, they had this holograph almost of the players and the teams that would pop up whenever they wanted to display information on them. So, it's stuff like that. It's just really cool to see a nice advancement when it comes to the production. But I wanted to get the chance to actually try to get somebody at the event, or at least at the on the talent side, and maybe get their take in terms of what it's like being there, and what it's like being part of that production, and also just the event itself. And lo and behold, I was able to get a hold of Conrad, who's one of the panelists at the event. In fact, we also just had a podcast here on DotP with him. Actually, they did a one-on-one interview with him that you could check out on the website as well. But I was able to get a hold of him and have him sit down and talk with us about what it's like being at the event now. Conrad, how's it going, man?
Very well, very well. We're very shortly going to be starting the Kiev Major, hopefully here within about 10 hours, and I'm very excited to be a part of it.
Well, yeah, so real quickly, too, just to clarify, so you're casting, you're on the panel for the Kiev Major. You're not technically at the Kiev Major, though. Where are you?
No, we're not. We're actually located in Bucharest, Romania right now, which is very close, but not right next to the area. So the panelists are all at the PGL studios, broadcasting remotely, and casters will be on site, and Selection Shiva will be doing interviews and sort of additional content there right in Kiev.
Now, as we've seen at watching the event, I've been watching plenty myself. I know many have, of course. The production's been fantastic. I mean, you guys have been doing great, taking advantage of the studio. I assume that's why, one of the reasons at least, why they're kind of doing it like that. Do you agree with that? Do you like the fact that it's like that, or would you have rather been at Kiev?
I mean, I think you always want to rather be at the event itself. Totally understandable in this case. The Russian broadcasters actually were not in Boston, or sorry, the panelists were not in Boston for the Boston Major. So it is understandable that these, the Russian-speaking guys will be on site for the event, while English maybe on the other side will not be. I do think there are some features and some things that are available that may not always be possible to do on site. Maybe constrictions from venue to logistics. Totally understandable. And if somebody says this is the best way to do it, I fully understand some of those reasons.
All right. So now, what about your experience overall? There in Budapest. There, how has your experience been at the event?
It's been great. I've known a lot of the casters and panelists for a long time. And it's kind of been a pleasure to actually work side by side with them. One interesting thing is me and Curtis have known each other for quite a while. I managed him for a little bit while on Cloud9, but recently we realized how close we lived in the city of Vancouver together, so we've been hanging out a lot in person. So it's really a pleasure to be working with him on the panel. Have you done panel work before? This is new for you, right? Yeah, it's definitely not my regular bread and butter. I watch probably more Dota than anybody else, and I might even have the stats to be able to prove that on Twitch. I typically am not on a front-facing role. I've attended a lot of the major events and a lot of the international events, never in the panelist or never in a camera-facing role, but usually through the broadcast side. So, like, say, the last major, for instance, one thing I did heavily was make sure that 1080p 60 was, working and available for the international, and that was the big one that we did the test on. So okay, so you've been around obviously the scene for a long time. You've been around the production even, but so this is kind of your first experience. So as a panelist, what has there been something as a panelist that kind of caught you off guard? You're like, I didn't realize it was like this or something. As somebody who's like a former producer of broadcast, I think I feel like I've seen it from a third party perspective. I think being up there, it's a little more daunting. The lights are on you. You're going to have to come up with something on the spot that maybe you weren't always ready for. But I've done a lot of research coming into this event, and just being able to talk to a lot of players and casters and even some of the managers, and just trying to get some insight into the teams beforehand has really helped me kind of figure out my role on the panel. Is there something that's happened behind the scenes, hanging out with the other talent there, especially, or the production even, that would be kind of a fun story to tell, something that was, entertaining? Well, actually earlier this morning, all the casters that are headed over to Kiev, includes some of the observers, both Wepas and Scriff, they all get into the shuttle early this morning or early this afternoon. And as they about, maybe 10, 20 minutes into their ride, they realize it's actually not going to the airport. And so they're very happy that they left early. But there was a slight mix-up on where that shuttle was supposed to go, and they ended up almost back at the studio before they realized they were headed in the wrong direction. Luckily, they were caught it in time. They're on the plane. They're all in Kiev now and ready to cast and observe the upcoming major event. So you got the group stages out of the way. First off, focusing on that side of things. Saw you several times on the panel right there. Working some long hours, though. Definitely some long days for the group stages especially. But is there something from the group stages that really stood out to you? Maybe a team, perhaps, that was a surprising result for you? Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me has to be Digital Chaos. I think those guys really kind of came out of nowhere. A lot of them kind of wrote them off and probably had them bottom four. I know I did. I've known Mason, Bulba, and Demon for a long, long time. I was actually with EG at TI4, so I had a chance to work directly with Mason. And Bulba, he was on Evil Geniuses when I was working there, same with Demon. And so just knowing these guys for a long time, I know they've always had this potential to really have a strong performance, but it's been interesting to see how Abed and Dubu have brought their own flair and kind of changed that team into becoming, one of the top teams here at the major for sure. One of the bigger things about being on the panel, one of the more entertaining things, I guess you could say, is that we get to watch you make your predictions. How are you on the predictions? I'm actually a lot better after yesterday. First day did not go very well. I was, I believe, 1-3 or 1-4, but I was all but one on the last day, and there were 6 games, so it brought my record up quite a bit. I definitely think predicting games in this current meta is really difficult, especially as we hadn't seen a lot of games from 7.05 initially. But I I'm very confident in my upcoming ones. I've got my bracket. I'm very, very satisfied on how I filled it out.
So with these panels, obviously, especially even for this event, they brought out players like Owie 2000, Rose, aka 1437. You got these players on the panel that have a lot of this player experience. Not to downright you by any means, Conrad, but you're a great guy yourself. You know a lot about the game. But is that almost intimidating for you, knowing that you're on a panel with these like prestigious players, or what?
No, not at all. I mean, like I said, I've known a lot of these guys for a long time. Former player manager myself. And I've even worked with a lot of, Fogged, for instance, was on EG same time I was when I was with Curtis, Owie 2000, sorry. He was one of the players I managed while on Cloud9. The key part of my role on the panel is to make sure that I'm not stepping into what these guys are going to bring, which is, this very deep insight. My role is to try and bring a broader picture to the general audience, as well as I think try and create a fun atmosphere that's interesting to people to watch.
Gotcha there. Well, now focusing on the main event coming up, the playoffs, whatever you want to call it here. We got single elimination. Do you know your schedule yet as far as what you're going to be doing with the panel work there?
Yeah, actually, I'll be the first game of the day. I can't tell you who else might be on it, but that'll be actually within the next probably 9 hours and 30 minutes. So hopefully this comes out before then. Yeah, I'm very excited to be on the beginning of the panel, and I'll be on the last panel. So I believe the games will be Invictus Gaming versus Mouse Sports and Virtus Pro versus IGV.
Okay. Well, yeah, so we get the idea of what the playoffs look like now. Just the overall big picture. Is there a team, with what you saw in the group stages especially, is there a team that you're really looking at being like, that team's going to go all the way?
A lot of people are speaking about Virtus Pro right now, and I definitely think their route to the grand finals will be potentially easier. The one key thing is that I think a lot of teams are being underestimated right now, and we don't really know how strong a lot of these teams will be coming out of the group stage. One thing we saw last time is Mousesport's former Ad Finum. They were able to make it to the grand finals and beat top teams like all the way there. So I'm not fully sold on any team yet. Virtus Pro definitely looks like they have one of the easier routes, arguably Invictus Gaming as well. And on the other side, I think it's just a bloodbath. We potentially could see Team Secret and then one of Thunderbirds or Evil Geniuses in the second round in the quarterfinals. I don't know. I don't know how I'm sure feeling about that. That's a really tough side of the bracket to be on.
All right, so what about a hero that comes to mind that maybe you saw in the group stages that was a bit of surprise to see there?
One of the big surprises to me was how strong Ricky has become. We saw that hero a little bit at DAC and some of the patches beforehand, and he's always been a strong roamer. But I think his strength combined with a lot of other heroes, he's able to provide a lot of value to a lot of teams right now. Another hero is also Magnus. We're seeing that one not as banned out as much during this group stage, but the few games that I was able to see, that hero just went extremely powerful. And the one last thing I actually want to mention is it's the amount of heroes that have been played in the group stage. I believe it's 94 or 96. It shows that this patch right now is super versatile, and there's a lot of options that are going to be available coming into this main stage.
Yeah, definitely was. I agree with you there 100%, and I'm looking forward to the main event, as I am sure you are as well. So, Conrad, really do appreciate you joining us all the way out there and taking the time here. So get some rest, man. And thanks again. We'll be seeing you on the panel there.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so it's always awesome to hear, especially somebody at the event and get their opinions and just also just kind of help get a vibe, what it's like being there in person. So definitely happy that we got Conrad on here to join us and talk about what it's like being a panelist there and how things are going so far. But guys, we got the playoffs now going to be coming up, the main event starting here. So I know I'm looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to not only watching it, but going to be having the next week's show. I'm already looking forward to next week's show. And to talk about, what comes to be the end of the Kiev Major and going over the results and everything. But with all of that said, of course, there are other events that do take place or have been taking place, or information more so. Again, when a major like this is happening, there really isn't a lot of events actually happening with play, but there is some stuff to talk about with that said. And actually, this is a segment I like to call the competitive surge. So let's get into it now. We got the Zodac qualifiers actually are currently happening. Not necessarily during the Kiev Major, but they finished up, part of them finished up right before it, and then we have the other parts of it continuing after the Kiev Major right here. But right before the Kiev qualifiers taking place here, the Southeast Asian region, the first team out of Southeast Asia, actually qualified for the Kiev, or not the Kiev Major, the Zodac event. And the Zodac Cup Masters, it's actually a $100,000 tournament that's going to take place in Taipei. It's a LAN event that'll take place in late May, I believe. So, but they've been running these qualifiers. I've actually had the chance to cast a couple of their qualifiers. Right now, it's Cloud9 out of Europe and Invictus Gaming out of China. Fnatic actually joining those teams out of Southeast Asia, and I gotta say, they looked good. Fnatic actually looked really good in the Southeast Asian qualifiers, at least the bits and pieces I gotta watch them. Now, to be fair, Faceless and TNC were not in this event because obviously they were busy with the Kiev Major. There is a second qualifier though, so I have a feeling that they're going to be in the second qualifier most likely. Granted, there are 2 invite spots also, so that's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. But Fnatic actually defeat Clutch Gamers 2-0 in the end to actually claim their spot. Clutch Gamers, that's not an easy victory either, because Clutch Gamers actually, they're just coming off the Southeast Asian Summit 7 qualifiers and going to be representing Southeast Asia, as I mentioned last week. So Fnatic 2-0 in the grand finals there, but again, they looked good doing so, even in the semifinals against WG Unity, another solid team. They dominated, frankly. This is a Fnatic squad, their new Fnatic squad, that actually is something to look out for moving forward here. So going to be interesting to see how more Southeast Asia competition kind of steps up in the near future. Epicenter actually announced its first invite team. Now, Epicenter is set to take place in June, actually, early June there, June 4th, it looks like going to be the start date. It's a LAN that's set to take place in Moscow. $500,000 prize pool announced. OG so far is the only announced team as far as being invited, so OG is going to be going. The qualifiers for each of the regions, I think, are set to take place starting next week, next weekend even, that is. And there's still more information to come out on that. But after the Kiev Major takes place, I'm sure we'll get a lot more information on it. And we'll be able to talk about it even in next week's show. So as far as events go, that's really all the updates on the other events that are currently going on. Again, with the Kiev Major going on, it makes sense. But there were a couple of roster updates that I also wanted to go over here. Kind of ones that are somewhat dear to my heart, I guess you could say, as far as, my history with some of these players. First one is Complexity. Complexity actually released a statement. They officially released 2 of their players, Monkeys Forever, or now Monkeys. Also, 747, no longer a part of Complexity. I gotta say, just personally, on my take on that real quickly, I was shocked to hear this in a lot of ways, mainly because they were one ban away from going to the Kiev Major. And I say it like that, and I say that in almost a loving way, because again, I've known Swin Mullins and Z-Free for the longest time. I root for this team. I've always been a fan of them ever since they came in Dota 2, and I consider myself a fan of Complexity. If they ban Meepo in Game 3 against Onyx, now known as DC, they very likely could win that game and now instead be the team at the Kiev Major. They didn't, though. Obviously, the game played out. Onyx won, now known as Digital Chaos. They're there, yada yada. Long story short. But the point is, they were close. Now, they have had some disappointing results since then. In fact, the Zodac qualifiers for North America, they ended up losing in that to a team called Team Stan, as I mentioned, I think, last week as well. So they also lost in another open qualifier recently. I think it was actually for the Epicenter, if I'm not mistaken, to get to the qualifiers. They lost in that. And it was shortly after that where they announced this. Kyle Bautista, I know him as Beef actually, but he's a Complexity general manager. He stated, and I quote, "While we didn't reach the level of success we were looking for with this lineup, I can truly say it has been a great experience working with both Jaren and Eric. The team worked hard and had a consistently positive environment even after tough losses. We are sad to say goodbye to 2 friends, but we would also like to thank them for their hard work and ongoing support." looking at the future, we're going to be evaluating our options for the TI7 roster lock. We're not going to rush into this, so we appreciate your support and patience during the process. I'm glad to hear. I feel like they've always been in a situation, their last couple of roster scenarios, with both Jason eventually picking up Monkeys, and then he had, what was it? It was Cancel. That's right, Cancel to pick up 747. They've been kind of forced to do it very quickly. I do like what he's saying at the end right there. Okay, they're kind of almost starting from fresh in a lot of ways. They're going to give themselves a bit of time here, moving forward. Now, they're not going to have the most time, obviously, with TI7 now being the next big event, but they'll get some time to kind of figure that out and try to see what their options are. So, maybe that'll mean for more success moving forward, but we'll see. We'll have to wait and see what they do. One other roster situation I wanted to bring up is actually Insania, the newest member of NIP. Yes, that's right. Insania replacing Cinderin, who's no longer a part of the team. He's actually, of course, even casting at the Kiev Major right here. He does a great job with that. But Cinderin leaving the roster, the team decided to give the opportunity to the up-and-coming player Aiden Insania Sarkohi. I think it's that. Anyways, the point is, as far as Insania, of course, now, he has a long history in Heroes of New Earth. I've known this guy forever. When it comes to Han, he is one of the best support players and most prestigious support players that we've ever seen in Heroes of New Earth. So, there's been a lot of these Han players that have made the transition, obviously, to Dota 2 and done very well with it. I think he's going to join that list. I was very confident to believe that, back when I first started doing what I'm doing here almost a year ago now. And I'm not surprised to see him joining such a team as an NIP, but I understand that there's people out there that may not know this name as much as I do, or if you didn't really play Han at all. Know that if you're any bit of a fan of NIP, I think that he is going to be a great player for the team, and it's awesome that he's got this opportunity. So looking forward to seeing how he does with that roster, and hopefully in the future we can even get him on the show here and to talk about him joining NIP and see what he thinks there. So. But as far as the competitive surge go, I think that wraps up what we wanted to talk about and other events and news in the competitive scene. But again, the big focus on the Kiev Major right now, the group stages are out of the way. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we got the main event coming up right here. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. I know I will be, and I look forward already to seeing you guys on the next podcast show next week, which will be back to Friday. I know this show we're releasing on Thursday. Next week's will be back to Friday, and that's going to be our typical release date. But again, because of the Kiev Major scheduling, with them having the break here with the groups into the main event, we wanted to release it before the main event started, or as it was starting, basically. So it was a little more relevant, of course. So hopefully you guys are enjoying it, and I already look forward to next week's show, like I said. So thanks again to the guests that I had on today's show, including Peter Pan Dam, as well as Nahaz and Conrad. And well, guys, we'll see you next time on the DotPro with myself, BreakyCPK.